talk a little bit about the grad program for those who are unfamiliar with it. And then because I'm a new face for many of you, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and some of the plans that I have for the graduate program moving forward. So the graduate program in acoustics is a residence and distance education program. We have about 60 or so residents, master's and PhD students. And we have about another 100 students online enrolled every semester. And our online students are a mix between students who are taking courses ad hoc or one at a time versus degree seeking students. So if you have people in your company who just want to get expertise in a single area, they're welcome to join as a non-degree seeking student. They don't have to take 30 credits and earn a degree. They can take one class and get information in the area that they need it in. We have we have 8 faculty within the graduate program. And as you can imagine, we can't handle 160 students with 8 faculty. So we have a very strong affiliated faculty group within the graduate program for acoustics, and many of those affiliated faculty are also members of the CAV. Those faculty come from several other academic programs, as well as we have many faculty from the Applied Research Lab. We have roughly about 35 affiliated faculty at this point. Those faculty members help to advise our students. They help serve on our committees. They help to teach courses. So we're very interdisciplinary throughout the College of Engineering and across the university. We even have several faculty members outside of the College of Engineering. So it's a very unique program for many reasons, and I'm very proud to be representing the unit moving forward. So I will tell you a little bit about myself. And I wasn't sure of the camera situation here, so I got a big picture of me up here, but everyone can see me online. So I apologize for having to look at me twice. I actually started out my career as a mechanical engineer and found noise control sort of late in my career as an undergraduate student, and then did a master's in noise control and ended up coming to Penn State for my PhD. So I'm a Penn State alum. I worked at the Applied Research Lab for 8 years, working on underwater structural acoustics, and then decided to go to the faculty track and went back to Michigan Tech, where I was a mechanical engineering faculty for 8 years. And in January, had the opportunity to come back here to lead the graduate program in acoustics. And so I've been here now for about 9.5 months, and it's been great being back. I also have several endeavors outside of the university. So I have 3 external companies. 2 of them are startups from former students working on technologies that we've spun out of the lab into companies. One in acoustics and one actually in beach safety, which is a totally different realm than acoustics, but kind of fun. So I like to dabble in a lot of different things. So I have a fairly wide-ranging research program. So I have a lot of overlap with many of my faculty. I consider myself broadly a noise control engineer, but I do things like underwater acoustics, structural acoustics, Arctic sensing. When I was here as a student, I did quite a bit of crowd noise work, measuring crowd noise at Beaver Stadium. That was a very, very fun project. Not a lot of funding in that area, but really a fun project. So I have lots and lots of interests even beyond acoustics in machine learning and AI and cybersecurity. I've done a lot of work with Office of Naval Research in those areas as well. So, and then of course, technology commercialization in my company spinouts and working to move our technology we build in the lab to potential customers. So I'm really happy to be here. A little bit about myself. What do I have planned for the graduate program in acoustics? Well, the first thing we're doing is we're in the process of undergoing a strategic planning process. So don't try to read this. This is an eye chart. But what I want to show you here is we're thinking basically in terms of 4 big goals of what we want our program to be in the future. The first is we want to have an equitable program. So we're looking at how we can recruit and retain top quality faculty, staff, and students who come from diverse backgrounds, and maintain an inclusive environment within our program. We already are really set up for that because we have a very interdisciplinary program, which lends itself well to that, but we want to put our stamp on that moving forward. The second probably relates the most to this group, and that is creating interinstitutional and external collaboration and research. So the CAVs is going to be a big part of that as we move forward, and I look forward to working with all of you. But we really want to look at bullet number 2 here, build and strengthen our relationships with our alumni and our industry partners. And this is a big part of that. Our third goal is continuing educational innovation in acoustics. As you more than likely know, we are the only civilian acoustics program in the country, and we're proud of that. And we want to continue to push the envelope there in terms of innovating in our curriculum and developing paths for undergraduates to reach our program. And then finally, we want to look at the administrative side of our house and make sure that we are leading the university in terms of shared governance and administrative efficiency. So that's sort of the big picture of where we're headed. The program's in wonderful shape. I owe a lot to the previous director, Dr. Sparrow, and his predecessor, Dr. Ashley, who is now the interim dean for the College of Engineering, done a great job setting the program up, and I'm really proud to be taking it into new heights, hopefully. So the next steps in our strategic planning procedure, we're working on creating action items for those goals so that we can have key performance indicators with a timeline. So we actually have things that we can complete, finish off with a mission and a vision statement, and then have a full strategic plan that we can distribute to our partners and actually solicit feedback from our partners, which would be great. So I'm hoping to have this done within the next 2 to 3 months so that we can start soliciting feedback from our partners. So we may actually use the CAV to help distribute some of that. And, you know, please feel free to come up to me if you're interested in providing any feedback. One of the things that I'm very interested in from the acoustics program perspective is forming what's called an industrial and professional advisory council. So each department within the College of Engineering has the ability to form these industrial councils that act as advisory groups for each department. And they also act as a link between the department and the college. So the graduate program in acoustics has historically not had an IPAC. And I'm interested in starting an IPAC in the near future. So if you or your company may be interested in participating in an IPAC as an advisor to the acoustics program, and representing us to the college, I would be more than happy to chat with you at some point today or tomorrow. I'll be around both days. And there's a web address here if you're interested in more details on what IPACs are. So in 2024, we're going to be moving into a new building in the graduate program. This is what is now called West 1. You'll note here that naming opportunities exist. So it's called West 1, not because Mr. West built it, because we don't have a name for it. It's on the west side of campus. But the acoustics program will be moving in there. So we have faculty and staff offices. We'll have student space. We're going to have an anechoic reverb suite that we're really proud of. Our reverb suite is going to have non-parallel walls and be really, really great facility. The anechoic suite will be the new home to sprawl, which Olivia introduced a little bit in her talk. The aerospace department, in conjunction with the acoustics program, is supporting a flow-through anechoic room where they can do more jet noise research. So that'll be a larger version of what they already have in Hammond. Some of our faculty will be moving their individual lab spaces there. Dr. Simon's lab will be moving in there, and Dr. Jing's lab. So we're excited about that. And then we're also going to have a CAV lab space in the basement. So it'll be similar to the CAV lab spaces that we have in Hammond right now that are general use lab spaces that we can all use for shared use for our projects. So there's more to come on this tomorrow. Dwayne Rush, one of the project managers for this, is going to come and I think give us a 3D like fly through of the building so we can look at the acoustic spaces. So that'll be really exciting. But I did want to bring up that, again, naming opportunities do exist. We're looking for partners to name classrooms and offices and buildings and all that kind of stuff. So if you think your company has any interest in that at all, please let us know. Be happy to have that conversation. Okay, so that wraps up my 10-minute spiel on the acoustics program. Good. I wanted to leave a little time for questions. So are there any questions about what the acoustics program is or where we're headed? Or who I am?
So I'm really excited to see the new building that you're, is that for the acoustics department, or is it just an engineering building that you sort of laid claim to when it was envisioned?
Yeah, great question. So that is not entirely for the acoustics program. I wish it was. That would be awesome. That is a shared building that will house aerospace engineering, civil engineering, architectural engineering, and acoustics. So it's going to be, I think, really advantageous for the acoustics program because those are programs that we coordinate and collaborate with very well anyway. We have faculty in all of those programs that are affiliated faculty with our program. And it's going to give the acoustics program, I think, a little more visibility to undergraduates in those programs so that we have an opportunity to draw them into our graduate program. So I'm very excited. No, by all means, that is not all an acoustics building. I wish. That would be great. But maybe if Gulfstream wants to name it, we could convince them to do that. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is a government liaison from the Naval Research Lab. Dr. Earl Williams is here, one of our accomplished alumni from Penn State. So we're very thrilled to have him back to talk to you today about basic research in sound and vibration at NRL. So just forward and back, they're all back there, so you won't see anything here.
Forward.
Yep, that's in. This is the laser if you want to use the laser.
That really work?
Yeah, it does. It's not.
Oh, there it is. Not very big laser. There I am. Okay. Hey, it's a pleasure to be back here and representing the Naval Research Laboratory. Graduated here a long time ago. Did my PhD in acoustics under Eugen Skudrick. Pretty famous scientist, physicist, wrote the famous red book on foundations of acoustics. You may have seen it. I graduated by around 79 or so, and then I did my postdoc with Jay Maynard over in the physics department, where we developed near field acoustical holography. Just a great 4 years there. It was for postdocing. There's an article that appeared back in '81 where highlighted our research in near field acoustical holography. There's me and Jay Maynard in the back, and a couple of the other grad students that were in the program. If you're going to have fun being a postdoc, this is where we had just a tremendous great time. On the top there, you can kind of see our 256 element electret array that we built to make the holographic measurements. Anyway, so I'm here kind of representing not my normal kind of talk. Is not going to be technical talk. It's going to be more of a programmatic talk, although I did sneak some technical stuff in just for fun. So who are we? Naval Research Lab. Again, you know, I'm here like Carter Rock was here to try to recruit students. We haven't been here in the past, and I think this is an ideal place to bring people into the acoustics division. The Naval Research Lab is primarily made up with 4 directorates, as you can see here, and the areas of the directorates, the systems directorate, and you can read the labels there. We're in the 3rd one over on the right. This is the acoustics division. But what you can see about the Naval Research Lab is it's a huge comprehensive bit of science. We have chemistry, we have space sciences. They've launched spacecraft. In the chemistry department, we had a Nobel Prize winner there, and so made us very famous. The radar division, if you like doing radar stuff. course, I'm primarily talking about acoustics today, but if you're interested in these other areas, or you come and want to do acoustics and say, oh, maybe I should do something else, there's enormous opportunities there. As you can see, we have over 2,700 personnel. There's a lot of PhDs, almost 900 PhDs. There are many society fellows, as you can read there, and a lot of publications. You can see there's over 4,000 publications in the last 5 years, refereed journals. So we're really kind of like a university in that they want to promote basic research. This is the basic research arm of the Office of Naval Research. And that's what I'm representing here today and what I want to highlight here today. We also do a lot of patents. So if you have an invention that's looks like it's going to be lucrative, they will patent it for you, and you can share the license with the Navy. Here's the acoustics division. So Brian Houston is our head, and I'm the senior scientist for structural acoustics. I have a position in what's called the senior technologist, where I'm not really allowed to manage people. This is great. I love it. So I'm tasked to do basic research. There are three groups here, branches we call them, headed up where you can see on the left there, the structural acoustics and stealth, signature exploitations, UUVs, that's underwater, unmanned underwater vehicles, ocean acoustics, metamaterials, and things like that. There's a group down in Stennis that does some of the Navy propagation models. That's usually important for the Navy. What do we do? We're basic 6-1. These are the categories that we use to list the kind of research categories. We do fundamental science. That's called 6-1. I live in that world now for the last 40 years. As you can see, some of the reading from the bottom: acoustic propagation. I don't know if you can read it. Scattering and radiation, theoretical acoustic modeling, extraterrestrial acoustics. We get into the space. Sensors and nanomechanics, acoustic holography, which of course has been a great boost to the Navy. Acoustic stealth, acoustic communications, and metamaterials. So we have quite a large group of metamaterials. Then we go up kind of further as we get up into the higher categories. You get autonomous sensing, larger unmanned vehicles, and ordnance remediation, detecting buried ordnance in the ground, mines and whatnot. And then you get up into the higher up at the top there, where you're actually doing anti-submarine warfare. Of course, this is looking at submarines is our major effort at the lab, with countermeasures and whatnot. So you might say, if you're going to take this and compare it to what you heard from Tony earlier at Carteret, they live kind of in the upper end of this chart. We live at the lower end of this chart. So these, as you heard him say, things that are developed in 6-1, 6-2 areas will move on to the, hopefully, to be put onto the fleet, moving into a place like Carteret, where they actually can put it on the submarines and whatnot. Okay, enough of that. I'm going to try to go somewhat quickly through this. I have too many slides, as Oliver told me very nicely. So here's a couple of the major facilities in the physical acoustics area. The nanoscience Naval laboratory is huge. They get in a lot of proposals every year to do nanoscience work. It's new. We have a low temperature dynamics lab. We have the pump probe laboratory for phonon transport, and finally the lab for structural acoustics. I'll talk more about that because that's something I've been involved very much with. There we go. Facilities at sea. We do go to sea if you like riding on boats and whatnot. Well, that's a good place to be. On the left-hand side, we can see some of the deployable arrays. They have like an average of like 10 sea experiments a year. That's from the Naval Research Lab. We have the AUVs with the broadband sensors. We have our sources, as you can see there. And on the very bottom, there is actually a facility that's placed in the water to do biostatic measurements of buried ordnance. And then there's also a kind of a bottom sediment facility, a little square there where we look at buried targets and whatnot. Okay, so there's kind of the 5 of the strategic research areas, and I'll go over some of these fairly quickly. One of the major efforts we have in the division is due to a lot of work by Mike Collins, and this is development of computer codes that can predict the paths of sound travel in the water. So this has a surface reflections, it has bottom bounce, it has penetration of the bottom, and it deals with non-flat surfaces. As you can see, some of the predictions made in the 6 panels on the top there. It's a very sophisticated code built on the parabolic equation model, and there's a lot of nice mathematics behind that, including Pade approximations and whatnot. We're continuing working in that area quite extensively. They also want to bring those codes under the sea ice. The sea ice is becoming more and more important these days as global warming melts an awful lot of it and allows access to much higher access. So there's quite a bit of work going in developing models for undersea. They actually go up and do some experiments for those that are robust with regards to the weather. And I'll go on. So the physical and structural acoustics, where I kind of reside, deals with a lot of the basic physics of what's going on in submarines, surface ships, transducers, targets, UXO, which is unexploded ordnance. We do structural acoustic scattering experiments. This on the right panel is the frequency versus aspect angle for a monostatic target strength of a target that's hung in our facilities. And acoustic imaging, which has gotten some exciting results. We also go to the nanoscale in some of this work, which allows us to look at very small MEMS vibrators that have unique capabilities. I'll talk more too about the metamaterials branch of stuff. This is our facility. It's a very exciting facility. It's been around for a while. 50-foot deep tank, 50 feet across, fully instrumented, in which we do a lot of the measurements for underwater targets. They may be submarine models. They might be landmines. Sea mines, or other. You can see on the bottom here, like a UXO target, unexploded ordnance. That's a huge subject these days. Actually, a lot of UXOs left over from the Second World War that didn't explode, and so it becomes very important sometimes, especially in Europe, to try to identify those. I've used this facility to develop near-field acoustical holography underwater, bringing the work from Penn State there. It's been very exciting, and I've had a lot of fun. The typical hologram is shown. There's a dual hydrophone scanner that actually is able to measure at each one of those little red dots around a cylindrical target. And this one, in this case, is like 512 points in the axial direction, 64 around. You get 30,000 points. You run that through near-field acoustical holography, allows you to get the surface velocity, allows you to get the surface intensity, supersonic intensity. And then you can project this stuff to the far field to find out what the directivity patterns might be of the particular. And generally, in these cases, are mostly radiation experiments where we're having a source inside the actual target. So there, some of the other targets they look at are shown on the left here. Some of the UUVs. The larger targets are very popular now with the Navy. We do some modeling of that, and there are at-sea measurements. It says late February 2019. I think it's a little bit old slide. So I assume those experiments have been done, but the idea is to try to model some of these numerically and compare it to the experiment. So we have at NRL a very hefty code shown on the left here, developed by SciCat Day, which is called STARS 3D. And this is a highly parallel, maybe hundreds of thousands of degrees of freedom, millions of degrees of freedom solved on many processors through high performance computing. It does a lot of the structural stuff, whether it's just radiation, structural vibrations, adding internal structure to the source of interest. That's generally a low frequency problem. Pushing it higher is difficult, but you can go pretty high using a Helmholtz-Kirchhoff kind of approximation, where you don't put any elastic structure in on the right there. It's called BASIS, B-A-S-I-S. This is a code for using kind of just what reflects the instant wave. So this is all that. This is kind of bistatic measurements, not radiation measurements. So it's a geometric optics approach to looking at these submarine type structures. What I love, I've been having a lot of fun with, is this finite element code. It's not going to do 100 million degrees of freedom, but I can do 10. I can do 10 million. But this is great in terms of and what I highlighted. The acoustics division has a bunch of licenses. So when Brian Houston came in, he said, "Okay, I'm going to buy some licenses for you guys to fool around with." You should have never done that, because I spent a couple of years fooling around with this. It just takes a lot of time. But what's nice about these kind of codes, whether it's COMSOL and whatnot, you can actually do a numerical experiment. Instead of spending $1 million to put a physical experiment together, you can do the numerical experiment, as long as you realize that you better compare it against some experimental data, because you can easily go down a rabbit hole and get completely the wrong answers. I love this particular code because of the graphics. I mean, it's kind of lived in this graphics area for 40 years. And for instance, here's a result for an internally driven shell with frames that's showing the pressure field in positive, negative, pressure field from the surface out to a couple of wavelengths away, acoustic. But you see right away, it's a multi-scale problem. This is the nemesis of what we deal with, and why doing structural acoustics underwater is really exciting, because what lives on the shell are these very, very short wavelengths, evanescent waves that don't radiate into the fluid. But you do all your measurements generally on the shell. Everything inside that's measuring the shell is measuring these guys, So you've got a real problem. You can't assume everything is at the acoustic wavelength. Anyway, but you learn that from running the COMSOL models. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly over some of these areas. Brian gave me these view graphs, and a lot of signal processing going on. Can get pretty advanced at times, and very large autonomous vehicles. And the challenge here is they go out for a long time. How can you keep the software updated when you're going out for a long time? So, I mean, we actually do these experiments. The prototype that was developed, and this is a mine hunting prototype. So this is they took a UUV and adapted it, put in a phased projector array. It was all built at the Naval Research Lab in the Acoustics Division. Put in a phased projector array, a receiver array in the interior, shown at the bottom left, and then interrogates the bottom as it's traveling, creating a synthetic aperture because of the motion. And then it runs and does this interrogation of all these little squares on there, and looks for mines, looks for buried objects. And is a very sophisticated and been very successful at, whoops, went too fast, at uncovering targets. Of course, part of that also is using AI and techniques to classify what you see, because it might be a rock instead of a landmine. So you have to do a lot of these modeling of the different techniques. Then events, we do a lot of metamaterials. We have extensive 3D printing capabilities at the lab, so you can kind of make anything you want. Just only limited by the ideas that you can come up with. Remember, it's a basic research thing. So I'm going to sneak in a couple of few graphs on my own. And in the time I have left here, these are two collaborations that I've been excited about through the years. This, I mean, it goes way back in time, but I find it interesting, and it highlights some work we did with the industry. In this case, Boeing, NASA Langley. We heard from them earlier today. There's a great effort with NASA Langley and Boeing. Boeing provided a 777 aircraft for us to go and do some measurements in. We produced a 50 microphone array at NRL that could measure the 50 microphones simultaneously. The counterpart to that was Boeing produced a 50 element little electret array. Today, I think we'd build this out of MEMS microphones. And a typical diagnostic example, probably following the realm of near-field acoustical holography in terms of the theory, is a plot of the intensity field. I call it the volumetric acoustic intensity imager, because it had a particular thing which it images the acoustic intensity. And there was a lot of work at Penn State back in the days of Tichy and Gary Elko looking at acoustic intensity. Hopefully, there's still interest in this kind of stuff. But what's exciting is the fact that this measurements are taken in aircraft, and these are due to flow excitation of the external fuselage as the aircraft is flying. It's based on near-field holography, but it's based on what's called partial reference holography, which allows you to take your 50 microphones and say, okay, I'm going to paste an accelerometer somewhere on the fuselage where I suspect there might be a source, and then I just cross-correlate everything to that accelerometer. And when you do all that cross correlations, you come up with something like the picture on the right there, which shows the accelerometer being at the bottom there, which shows the acoustic intensity field correlated to that accelerometer, which is sitting on a resonating panel at the bottom of the sidewall. But what is exciting about this picture to me is the fact that it shows this kind of a diffraction pattern of the fuel as it travels up the side of the fuselage. You would never guess that was what was really there. And if you make pressure measurements and whatnot, you're not going to see it, because this shows you the direction of the energy flow. So I think, and the basic holography theory is simple. In this case, it's spherical harmonic expansions of the wave field. So, and it's all in my book and whatnot. But it's a beautiful approach to looking at noise sources. We've used it in automobiles. Also, we had a project with some Japanese for interior noise in automobiles. So the our university project, more recent, was dealt with the determining the structural admittance matrix of a target. This is done with Bill Cooperman at Scripps, and also in France with Sandrine and Philip Earl, and you can read their affiliations there. What is the acoustic admittance? It's really a simple expression. Usually you think of it as a point measurement, like this little guy on the front there applies a force and you make the velocity measurement at that point and you get impedance, right, or admittance. So that's really like one, if you take the full equation shown on the top there, the integral equation, discretize it, you have now something that looks represented by that matrix equation just below it. If you discretize it into endpoints. If you take just one, so you can see velocity on the left, the forces on the right. If you just take one term of that and plot it on the right here, you see the typical admittance matrix, right? The peaks are the resonances, the valleys are the anti-resonances, but there's a lot more here. If you look on the left here, if you just go down one column of this matrix, you can follow with frequency versus the horizontal axis, and angle, which is the vertical axis. You can see the change of the spectra of the modes, resonances, anti-resonances, as the modes pick up more and more nodal lines. You can follow it out there. Knowing this particular, being able to measure the structural admittance matrix allows you to do some very sophisticated scattering problems, which I've published on, but I don't have time to talk about talk about here. And I'm not going to go over the theory. I think I just want to show one of the results of trying to make this measurement. And this was done on a sphere that was printed at UCSD, in which we had 8 accelerometers and 8 microphones co-located. We had a physical source that was illuminating the structure. So you can actually, instead of having a force hammer driving the structure, you can actually just have a loudspeaker, and you move the loudspeaker around to a bunch of positions. You make these measurements and you come up with the top row for the estimate of the admittance matrix. And it was quite successful. It's only 8 points of measurement, which was quite remarkable. It's really a building block for acoustics. And I want to go over just very quickly at the end here some concepts which I think would be very helpful for new people coming out. It's based on the equivalent source method. Holography is always used kind of separable coordinate systems, you know, spherical wave expansions or cylindrical wave expansions, plane wave expansions. A new way of doing it, well, not too new anymore, but is to use the equivalent source method instead. And the equivalent source method is beautiful because it basically is represented by the equation above there, where the G is a free field Green's function, you know, and it represented a field point at X and a source point at Y. Q is just the volume flow of the source, unknown. Okay, so and you might say you could let's consider this thought experiment. Okay, we have a machine. I don't have an mechanical chamber. I have just a nice little cheap lab space. I put the machine on a concrete floor, and I want to measure its radiation. I want to measure what its far field looks like, and I want to know what the structure, the vibration of the structure is, and I want to know what the intensity where the sources are on the structure. How can I do this without with this equivalent source method? So what you do is you place an equivalent source inside the machine boundary, represented by Q of R3 there, and you place a source outside. Now, what are those 2 black surfaces? Those 2 black surfaces are the measurement surfaces in which I'm going to put a dual array of microphones. And there might be something like, as I showed on the left, we made this at in California at UCSD, 2 MEMS microphones. And you could populate the surface with maybe 200 of these MEMS microphones. Yeah, that's a big investment, but we can do it these days. And then you go one step further. You say, okay, instead of this one source, I'm going to populate. These are unknown. Remember, the Qs are unknown. I'm going to populate 2 surfaces, Q3, Q4. Q of R4, Q of R3. One surface completely inside the machine. One surface completely outside the machine. These are unknown, so you haven't had to do any physical work, just computation. And then your build a matrix is shown up there, and now you can actually invert for the Qs. You invert for those unknown source strengths. Great. Okay. Well, now what do you have? Well, you actually have something really significant, because it turns out that the sources that you put inside give you the radiated field, the scattered or the radiated field from that target, from that machine. The sources you put outside, the QR4, represent the incoming field without any reference to the machine. So basically, you can think of Q3, Q4 as that. Now you've taken away the walls of the chamber. You've taken away the machine itself. Now you just have a free field problem, except for the concrete floor. And you have a free field problem, which allows you to predict the scatter signature. And because these Green's functions are functions, continuous functions, you can get the normal velocity shown at the bottom there, the incident velocity, the scatter velocity, that take the sum to get the total velocity. And then at the very bottom, you can move the field point out to the far field using Q of R3 to predict the far field. So this last formula, this down at the bottom here, gives you the directivity pattern of the machine without having to go to an anechoic chamber or spend $100,000 to do it. So anyway, I just think this highlights what is called, when I said the incident and scattered field is called the field separation technique. I didn't invent it, but it's been around for a while. But there's no mathematical proof of it. We just know it works. So for those of you that like to do mathematics, you can work on that problem. Anyway, that's the summary of what I had to say. I'm here for the few students that are still here. Please come and see me. If you're interested in working at the Naval Research Lab, doing basic research, these kind of ideas, come talk to me, and I'll give you a card and whatnot and point you hopefully in the right direction for coming to work for us. Thank you. We did it in less than half an hour. Oh, Gary, thank you.
Not a technical question. Is there any interagency cooperation? You're doing a lot of work, NL's doing a lot of work on measuring sound and ice and charting the ocean, this kind of thing. And on the question of climate change, like, are you working with NOAA? Those people are trying to use what you're finding relative to what they're finding to kind of say the future rise of ocean current levels, that kind of thing.
So what group was it you mentioned? Am I working with?
NOAA.
Neurons? Sorry.
National Oceanographic.
Yes. So the STENIS group, I went over very quickly. The third of our branches is located in STENIS. They do a lot of the Naval stuff where they actually supply software to be put on the submarines and whatnot to try to predict the ocean propagation out at sea. So that's a huge problem. And
so there is agency into cooperation in Earl and other places like that. Is that?
yeah, they have the.
Just curious. Thank you.
Say, Earl, can you hear me? This is Steve.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, thanks again for doing this. It's always fun to see all the cool graphics. The last topic, the source separation technique. I know a lot of methods that involve big arrays of Reed's functions can be a little squirrely. I don't know if there's any practical guidance you can offer for separation distances based on frequencies or spacing or just things like that to make sure matrices don't go nuts when you start inverting them.
Holographic measurement distances or ESM? I mean,
well, your equivalent source technique where you're doing different.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Any practical tips? Not, and you only got 2 minutes, but just any practical tips people ought to know about there for success.
You want to know what the flexural wavelength that you're trying to get at in the structure, and you want to place your sources at about the same distance, that wavelength away. That gets you to at least to get the evanescent waves that are on the structure. Holography is famous for producing the evanescent part of the spectrum. So basically the rule of thumb is if you know, so you have to know something about the target, which you can measure and then reiterate back. You just take whatever that structural wavelength is, that's your separation distance from the surface. And that works great to catch most of the evanescent fields. And ESM is similar. That answer?
Okay, great.
Yeah. We're done. Thank you.
And our final speaker for this session is Dr. Julianna Simon. And is Raj here as well, or just Dr. Raj Kothapalli is also going to talk during this session. They are from the CAV group, the Biomedical Acoustics group.
Awesome, thanks. I'm just going to give a quick overview as the group lead. So we've up to 12 faculty members in our group. So we're continuing to grow, and we're happy to welcome more faculty members if and when people would like to join our group. So we've had spring 2022. We did have a speaker in for diffracting and nonlinear shear wave propagation in transversely isotropic soft tissue. A great talk out of John Cormack, who's a postdoc at University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And thought I had my fall speaker lined up. He's now pushed to spring. That's Eli. Won't even try his last name, Eli V from Virginia Tech. So we're still looking for a fall speaker, but spring we already have somebody lined up. And then finally, we do have 2 posters in our group that just gave their 3-minute overviews. So please come and check out their posters. We've had 1 student graduate, Molly Smallcomb from my group, on focused ultrasound therapy to treat tendinopathies. She's in Chicago looking for a job, if you know anybody in Chicago who has openings. And finally, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Raj Kothapalli, who's going to talk about his transparent ultrasound transducers, which is the main topic for today.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raj Kothapalli. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. And I thank Dr. Vic Sparrow for associating me to the graduate program here in acoustics. I'm also affiliated, I have an affiliated position in the graduate program in acoustics. And I'm also co-head of the Penn State Cancer Institute. So today I'm going to talk about, I actually thought it's going to be a 10-minute presentation. So I have made only 15 slides. So let's see, maybe it gives me more time to discuss these results. So today I'm going to talk about the topic integrated optical and acoustic devices for multimodal imaging and simulation. Okay, the motivation comes from the fact that optical and acoustic radiations are commonly used in several applications, including life science research for both preclinical and clinical applications. The advantages with these 2 types of radiations are both are safe, that means non-ionizing. They are affordable, portable, and relatively easy to integrate. So some examples of integrated optical and acoustic setups include photoacoustic imaging. Yeah, so the photoacoustic imaging and image-guided surgeries, ultrasound modulation of cells and tissues, and then there's a recent technique called optical coherence elastography. So all these imaging techniques, they combine optical and acoustic radiation, and also not just for imaging. These two types of radiations are also used for therapeutic applications, such as photomediated ultrasound therapy. I'm just showing an example of that here. So in this paper, these authors combine light and sound to ablate a blood vessels, which is important for avascular surgeries, including thrombosis, that means to remove the blood clot, right? But the problem with this techniques, which use conventional optical and ultrasound setups to integrate, is they are more complex. They employ more complex setups to integrate optical and acoustic radiation. So that's kind of complicates some of the translational applications, both in preclinical and clinical applications. So our hypothesis is that if you use transparent ultrasound transducers that allow the light to pass through the transducer, right, you can actually make these setups much less complicated and much more translational for clinical and preclinical applications. So with that, our lab's mission has been for the last 5 years to develop this integrated optical and acoustic devices for developing both diagnostic as well as therapeutic tools. When it comes to diagnostics, we are interested in developing multi-scale systems that are capable of imaging features as small as cells and as big as organs. For deriving multimodal information, That means from ultrasound, we want to obtain a structural and anatomical information. And from optics, we want to derive more functional or molecular information. So this slide kind of summarizes the three applications that I'm going to discuss today. So why we need transparent, how we employ transparent transducers for these three different applications. In the application one, it's for acoustic imaging. If you are not familiar with this concept, it's actually, you shine the light into the tissue, the light is converted to the sound by the molecules that absorb light. That's called photoacoustic effect, right? For example, hemoglobin, oxy, deoxyhemoglobin, melanin, water, lipids, all these molecules absorb pulse light and generate some wideband acoustic waves that we call it photoacoustic waves. And you can detect these photoacoustic waves using a regular broadband transducers. But it provides you more molecular information. So here, this example here, it shows a dedicated photoacoustic computer tomography system where a person is lying on the bed, there's a little hole through which the breast is suspended, and then there's a large water tank because you need acoustic waves are coupled to the transducers using a coupling medium such as water or a gel. So in this case, they are using a water to couple the sound generated from the breast into the transducers. They use a ring transducer array here in this setup, and the light is illuminating the breast from the top bottom like this, right? So it's a complicated setup, but it generates a very beautiful images of breast vasculature. It's very important, to image the vessels without injecting any contrast agents, not just for diagnosing the cancer, but also to understand whether the different types of therapies are actually working on the patient, right? Some of these therapies are supposed to kill the blood vessels, and the only way you know that is by employing this kind of technologies that can image the blood vessels without injecting any contrast agents. So this is the breast computer tomography system. And then for clinical applications that is used for acoustic imaging, but also in the preclinical world, very commonly for the acoustic microscopy imaging is deployed to where light, you can see that there's a light coupled into the animal from the sideways, and then the transducer is placed in the middle, right? So because the transducer is not transparent, so it leads to complicated setups like this, and where a large water bath is placed on the top of the animal to allow this co-alignment of light and sound fields, right? It complicates the setup. This is one application that I'm going to deal with today and show that how transparent ultrasound transducers would improve. And the second application is the multimodal endoscopy. So if you look at the conventional, oncology or cancer diagnostics, so ultrasound endoscopy and optical endoscopy are routinely applied on the same patient, often delayed by certain days, right? It not only brings discomfort to the patient because the person has to go through multiple endoscopy procedures, but also it increases the healthcare cost, and also it delays the access to the quality care, right? So what if you can combine all these imaging modalities, both ultrasound-based and optical-based imaging modalities into a single endoscopy device? Therefore, you are able to provide much more comprehensive information, structural information of the tumor, molecular information of the tumor, functional information of the tumor, all in one single setting, right? It increases the confidence for the physician to accurately diagnose the disease, right? So we are going to show that how a transparent ultrasound transducer can help develop a multimodal endoscope. For that, we are using a transparent ultrasound arrays. And the third application is the ultrasound stimulation of the cells and tissue. In many applications, ultrasound, actually it is now more increasingly applied, a field called focused ultrasound, so that is used for, it's even an FDA-approved technique for treating Parkinson's disease. So where the ultrasound will stimulate the brain, and they are, it's called neuromodulation, ultrasound neuromodulation. So to treat different types of neurodiseases. But what people don't understand is fundamentally how these ultrasound waves interact with the cells. What are the different types of, whether the cells have mechanisms to produce that response to the ultrasound waves, and how these mechanisms to produce are regulating different signaling pathways. We don't understand that. So they normally, apply these complicated setups where transducer is placed inside the water, and the focused ultrasound waves are hitting cells that are cultured, and then they are placed in a little water bath, and then they stimulate the cells, and then they use an optical microscope to look at what cells are, how the cells are behaving, right? So we are going to show that the cells that are directly cultured on our transplant transducers can actually help overcome these complications such as water coupling, and also can provide much higher resolution into the cells than with these conventional setups. So coming to the first application, the photoacoustic imaging, typically a linear ultrasound transducer is adapted for dual modality ultrasound and photoacoustic imaging. So you can see that there are two fiber bundles coupled next to the ultrasound transducer. As a result, because the light and sound fields are not co-aligned, because you can see that when you are hanging the light from the sideways, so you cannot place the light directly below the transducer. So therefore, there is going to be a misalignment of light and ultrasound fields that causes a shadow region. To overcome that, normally people, unlike in ultrasound, if you look at the ultrasound imaging, ultrasound device is directly placed on the surface of, they put a little gel and place the ultrasound device, right? But if you are using the same device for doing photoacoustic imaging, using this kind of coupling, they normally pull the whole device a little bit up so that you can co-align the light and sound fields. Because you are pulling the device a little bit up, right? So that extra distance that you are creating has to be filled inside the water medium to allow the sound to couple to the transducer. Because of that, you form a big dark region, right? So where there's a region where there's no light and sound, right? So it creates a lot of complications because you're placing an extra water bath on the top of the imaging subject. Then it also complicates the data acquisition. It lowers your imaging speed, right? So, the hypothesis here is that if you use a transparent ultrasound transducers, you can overcome some of these limitations. In the first application, I want to demonstrate that how we can use this transparent ultrasound transducers for photoacoustic microscopy. So on the left side, you see the transparent ultrasound transducer developed out of a transparent lithium niobate piezoelectric material. So here what you see is on top of a nickel ion image, double-sided ITO coated. ITO is a indium tin oxide, which is a transparent electrode. So we coated the piezoelectric material, lithium niobate piezoelectric material, which is transparent with an ITO. And then we sandwiched that between a transparent matching layer, which is parallel, and a transparent backing layer, which is an epoxy. And we made a transducer out of that, and which showed actually more than 80% transparency. As you can see, so which showed more than 80% transparency. We published this first paper in Optics Letters in 2019, where you can see that there's a little transducer that is placed here, and the light that is coupled to the fiber is integrated onto the back of the transducer, and you can see the light coming out. So before this, there was only one paper that maybe a couple of papers that showed transparent ultrasound transducers, but not with regular piezoelectric or conventional piezoelectrics. They were using capacitive micro-machined ultrasound transducers. So this is the first paper that showed the conventional piezoelectrics can be used to develop the transparent ultrasound transducers. After this paper is published, there are now, you see that multiple papers adapting conventional piezoelectrics to make the transparent transducers, because it's much easier to make using the regular fabrication tools. Unlike the capacitive micro-machined transducers, you need a clean room access. And then we have a higher performance than the CMA transducers, which is capacitive micro-machined transducers. After this initial demonstration that we can couple the light and do a basic photoacoustic imaging, next we went to demonstrate that we can do a multimodal microscopy using these transparent transducers. We actually, if you look at a regular neuroscience research, they actually remove the skull and put a glass plate so that they can use a regular optical microscope to see through the the glass window and image the neurons as well as the vasculature of the brain. So we thought, why not because our transparent transducers just look like a glass plate. So we replace the glass plate with our transparent transducer. That means we implanted our transparent transducers on a mouse brain. And this actually helped us to do multimodal microscopy on awake mouse. Awake mice. Because if you look at the fluoroacoustic microscopy setup that I showed you before, they are placing a large water bath that actually restricts from them imaging awake mice. So they have to therefore use anesthetized mice, which neuroscience people don't like it, right? So in this case, the mice can be awake, and as you can see, we have a head restrained mouse. The transducer is already implanted, and we are able to do a raster scanning of the light. And at each point, we can actually obtain a line, and then by doing the raster scanning, we can actually map the 3D vasculature of the brain. And here, this is actually shows the maximum intensity projection of the brain vasculature, right? This is for the acoustic microscopy imaging, and we can also depth resolve all these blood vessels. And in addition to the photoacoustic microscopy, we can also do a conventional intrinsic optical sensing as well as 2-photon microscopy. But for 2-photon microscopy, normally people label the blood vessels with certain contrast agents, right? So right now we are pushing forward the application of this to also image the neurons. In this picture, you are not able to see the neurons because the neurons are not labeled with any dyes. We can actually have them express certain fluorescent proteins such as GCAMs. So therefore, that's what we are now working on our mouse models so that we can image both neuronal activity as well as hemodynamic activity of the awake mouse brain. In response to different stimulus, actually you can subject this mouse to an exercise, or you can stimulate the whiskers, or you can stimulate certain parts of the brain and see how this hemodynamic activity or a neuronal activity is changing. Not just with photoacoustic microscopy, but using also the intrinsic optical sensing and 2-photon microscopy. So that's the one application I discussed, the photoacoustic microscopy. The next application that, as I mentioned, that ultrasound and optical endoscopies are routinely used for image-guided surgeries. These are the pictures I actually captured during a kidney partial nephrectomy surgery that I was observing when I was a postdoc at Stanford. So to identify the kidney tumors, so in the middle of the surgery, they call a radiologist. He would come and insert an ultrasound endoscope, right? That helps them identify the tumor margins using the ultrasound imaging. After the radiologist leaves, they inject a contrast agent, in this case, a fluorescence contrast agent called indocyanine grain, which is FDA approved. So that actually negatively marks the tumor. That means wherever the ICG is not taken, that is identified as the tumor. So then by combining these two images, the surgeon then performs the tumor surgery, right? Tumor removal surgery. So what if all this, both the fluorescence and ultrasound imaging is combined within one device? So that actually can help shorten the operating time, right? And then you can also get multimodal information in one single procedure. So this is just typical example, but this is routinely done for every other image-guided surgeries or cancer applications, including pancreatic cancer. They also use optical endoscopy and as well as ultrasound endoscopy. So with that motivation, so we developed an transparent ultrasound array. The one I showed you before on a mouse brain, that's a single element ultrasound transducer that is implanted on the mouse. So here we developed a transparent ultrasound array. The first one, the first generation device had only 64 elements. It uses a lithium niobate transparent material. And So we demonstrated using phantoms, you can actually obtain a multimodal information. So we constructed a phantom which has different multimodal targets. H1 or H2 are H1 and H2 are hyperechoic targets. They will only show up in the ultrasound imaging, and W1 to W4, these are metal white targets. So they absorb light and generate for acoustic contrast. Because they have an impedance mismatch with respect to the background, you can also see them in ultrasound imaging. And also we place some tubes that are flowing blood mimicking fluid so that we can also map the blood flow. We also want to demonstrate that this transducer can also map the blood flow. So here you see the ultrasound imaging. So both the hypoechoic targets are identified, and you can also see the contrast from all the 4 metal targets. This is an ultrasound image. In photoacoustic image, you don't see this background as clearly as in the ultrasound, and also you don't see H1 and H2 because these are only ultrasound targets. But you do see these all the 4 targets, W1 to W4, because they absorb light and generate the sound. And because these tubes are flowing, there's a blood mimicking fluid that is flowing through the blood, these 2 tubes. You can see, you can map them using a Doppler ultrasound. And this, I don't know if you can see, there's a blue color here and a red pixels here. So this actually shows the flow that is happening in the opposite directions. And more importantly, we also want to demonstrate we can do fluorescence imaging. As I mentioned before, fluorescence imaging is used for detecting the cancer. And for that, we placed PSU, the fluorescent beads in a pattern of PSU letters. We actually kept them under our transparent transducer. We shine a UV light through our transparent transducer, and that can light up all these beads and generate a green fluorescence, which we capture using an optical camera. So this demonstrates that the array is capable of generating ultrasound, photoacoustic, Doppler ultrasound, as well as fluorescence images, right, using one single device. Right now, we are actually trying to make an handheld multimodal endoscopy probe using this. So, but further, I did not mention this before, but if you look at the basic intermediate ultrasound transducer that we used, it has the parallel matching layer, and bandwidth is only 20%. And normally, if you look at conventional transducers, high frequency transducers, they have a minimum bandwidth of 40 to 50%, right? So we are always thinking how else we can improve the sensitivity of our transducers so that we can match the conventional ultrasound transducer sensitivity, right? So the first generation devices, we use parallel as a matching layer. In the next generation devices, we started using glass beads as in our matching layer. If you look at the conventional ultrasound transducer, they use alumina particles which are not transparent mixed inside the epoxy. So that's why they use it as a matching layer. So we were like wondering what kind of particles. They should be transparent, but they should have a similar acoustic density as alumina or other particles, right? So that we can use them for our in our matching layer. So we try different things, and our result shows that glass beads mixed inside the epoxy can serve as a very good matching layer. So this is a nickel line picture you see without the glass bead matching layer, and this is the transducer with the glass bead matching layer. It still maintains optical transparency. And if you look at the schematics here, if you look at this is a conventional way of integrating optical fibers to the transducers to do a acoustic imaging. It has a huge light offset, right? And some people actually are putting some lens so that they can cut down this light offset to a smaller region, right? But still, you cannot overcome the light offset region, which you see here. And then some people are also combining light and sound by putting some sort of reflectors. For example, here you see that they are reflectors, but still they have to use a large water bath on top of the tissue. But in our case, with a minimum gel coupling, like in the conventional ultrasound transducer, if you have a glass bead as a matching layer, it not only it has a dual purpose. One, it is acting as a matching layer to the transducer, but also it is helping our light to be diffused broadly into the tissue. That means it is pushing more photons into deep inside the tissue. So, and then you just have a minimal gel coupling. So these are our results, which are recently published in IEEE FFC journal. If you look at the pulse echo ultrasound results, right, A-line results, you see that without any matching layer, there's a lot of ringing, and the bandwidth is 10 to 15%, right? But with the 40% glass beads as a matching layer, you can see the pulse shape improve and the bandwidth improve to about 40–50%. So this is a pulse echo results, pulse echo ultrasound, and the light transmission. We also studied how the light diffusion, how the light is affected by this matching layer. And in a free space, that means without any matching layer, you can see the column. If you are sending a collimated light beam to the transducer, you can see the collimated spot. But if you are sending the same light through the matching a transducer which has a 40% glass bead matching layer, the light is nicely diffused. So we also did for acoustic measurements, and we can also see that for acoustic sensitivity as well as the bandwidth is also improved. We saw like at least 2 orders of magnitude improvement in our sensitivity. So that's what we are doing. We are trying to optimize each step in our transparent transducer, the matching layer, and also recently we replaced the lithium niobate material with a transparent PMNPT, which has a higher DT3 coefficient. And we demonstrated that. This is my last minute slide, so I don't have much results to show you here, but we recently published that paper in IEEE Census Letters. So this is a lithium niobate transducer, and this is a PMNPT-based transparent transducer. Although the transparency is less in the PMNPT based transparent transducer, but we have again 2 orders of more magnitude for both pulse echo as well as for the acoustic response compared to the lithium niobate transducer. So we are now down to the last step. We are in search of a better transparent electrode than ITO, because ITO has still higher resistivity compared to the gold, and we can't use gold because it's not transparent. So we are looking for novel transparent electrodes so that we can further push the sensitivity of our transparent transducer to be many near conventional transducers. So that's all with the transducers, but and the last application I want to show, which is a cool thing, because I always wanted to watch something not related to imaging, and very happy to see that we were able to extend the applications of our transparent transducer, not just for imaging, but also for the stimulation. As I mentioned before, ultrasound stimulation is used in a lot of preclinical and clinical applications, more importantly for the neuromodulation as well as for regenerative medicine applications, where they are using ultrasound to help the tissue grow blood vessels or the bone, right? But fundamentally, to study how the ultrasound interacts with the cells, people use setup like this, where you have a water bath, where there's a focused ultrasound that is striking the cells, right? And then they use an optical microscope to capture both the cell signaling as cell morphological images using bright field and fluorescence images. And this actually is not a robust setup because you are suspending the cells inside a water bath, so you cannot reuse them. And also the stimulation is not uniform throughout the cells. So it's causing a stimulation at a particular point where the sound is focusing, and it sets a pressure gradient, and that pressure gradient propagates and stimulates the other cells. So therefore, the pressure gradient that the cells that in the center where the sound is focused is different from the cells that are on the periphery, right? So it's not a uniform stimulation. That's one disadvantage, and other complication, as I mentioned. So in our case, because our transparent transducer just looks like a glass plate, so we actually modified the surface of the transducer with some sort of chemicals so that the cells can grow on the top of our transducer. So now, just like how people place this in microscopy world, in life sciences, they actually have a microscopy slide. They insert inside a microscope and they look at, high resolution images. So we can do the same thing. We can take our transparent transducer, insert in a microscope, and then while I'm stimulating the cells with different parameters, I can observe what is happening. So, so we published this paper on a lab on chip, which is selected as a cover article. And this image actually shows that we can actually culture the cells on the top of the transducer. You can see that this is a cell signaling images. The cells are bladder cancer cells. For our application, we chose first application, we chose bladder cancer cells, and the cells are loaded with calcium indicators. That means whenever a stimulation is happening, the first way to confirm a stimulation has happened is in life sciences research, they use this fluorescent calcium indicators. That means the cells, when the ultrasound waves are striking the cells, the hypothesis here is that there are some certain mechanosensitive proteins that sense this mechanical pressure waves, and then they open up the calcium and potassium and all other channels, and therefore there is a calcium enters the cell from the extracellular matrix. Because you are moving the cells with the calcium indicators, fluorescent calcium indicators, as you stimulate more calcium is going to enter the cell, so the cells are going to fluoresce more, right? So you can see that with this, in the first application, we did a very low intensity pulse ultrasound stimulation. So therefore, even with that, you can see that there is some little brightness increase when the stimulation is on versus when there is no stimulation, right? Even the cells are undergoing morphological changes. If I can zoom, you can clearly see the cell shape is changing. This is very interesting for life science people because they are always wondering whether it is cell morphology that is changing the cell signaling or the cell signaling which is causing the morphological changes, right? So we can study that beautifully using this kind of images. We are not attuned to that in our setup. We just want to, in our first experiment, we just want to demonstrate that we are able to do the thing. So, and we actually with single cell analysis, and we can actually plot for each cell what is the peak time of the fluorescence. We can do all these things, and we also measure the temperature change is very small during the ultrasound stimulation, right? It's not even 1 degree change, and then we increase the amplitude of stimulation, and you can see more calcium entering the cells, right? So therefore, we have a platform that you can modify the acoustic parameters to cause whatever non-thermal as well as thermal effects inside the cells or tissue. So here the temperature change is a little higher, more than a degree here. We are exploring different applications of this, both for neuromodulation. We are culturing the neuron cells and exploring some applications in neuroscience. And we have a small seed grant funded to see how whether we can control the stem cell differentiation using ultrasound. So that is something we are exploring. In this application, as you can see that we are able to differentiate the non-aggressive cancer cell versus aggressive cancer cells using ultrasound stimulation. They show a different calcium dynamics, right? In summary, we developed this transparent transducers. We were exploring different applications. Most of this work is funded by the seed grants, the transparent transducers. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting to acquire a federal grant on transparent transducers. So it's a high risk research that we've been pursuing for the last 5 years with some seed funding from the Penn State. So therefore, I thank all these funding sources, Grace Woodward grant, College of Engineering, multidisciplinary seed grant, and recently Penn State Material Research Institute funding this for studying whether we can control the stem cell differentiation using the ultrasound. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for talking. All right, thanks, everyone. We're going to take a half an hour, about 25-minute break. So be back here at 3:45. And we'll have our last two talks of the day.